World leaders, lobbyists and scientists are all meeting in Azerbaijan for the annual COP conference. Billions of dollars have been pledged at previous talks, but can any amount of money make a difference to global warming? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, our planet is getting hotter, sea levels are rising and major weather events are becoming more common. Smaller and poorer nations are in the most danger. But with the big polluters sitting this conference out, can their voices be heard? And can they get the help they need?
The world is experiencing climate disasters at an alarming rate, from more frequent floods, stronger hurricanes, longer droughts and deadly wildfires. 2024 is set to be the hottest year on record, despite the landmark Paris Agreement 9 years ago at COP29. It agreed to limit the increase in global temperatures to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels by 2030. But how much can be achieved this year when leaders of the 13 biggest polluters, including the US, China and India, are not attending? On the agenda is the financial commitment from wealthier nations to help developing countries adapt to the impact of climate change.
This is an injustice perpetrated by the few. The G20 accounts for around 80% of global emissions, and it is an injustice that must end.
$100 billion a year has already been pledged, but experts warn $1 trillion a year is needed by 2030. It's expected to be difficult to reach a consensus in Baku, with countries so far disagreeing on how much money is needed, who should contribute, and how funding will be spent.
Well, let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Manchester in the UK is Ruth Townend. She's a Senior Research Fellow at Chatham House. And I'm delighted to say, here with me in the studio is the energy analyst Gaurav Sharma and Chris Caldwell, the CEO of United Renewables. You're all very welcome to Roundtable. Chris, I'll come to you. The top 13 polluters in the world, their leaders have not gone to COP. What can we read into this?
We can read into this as a complicated world. And now each of the leaders have their own excuses and their own reasons for not turning up. Joe Biden, for obvious reasons. But for example, Macron is not there because of political differences between the host country. Elections coming up in Germany. Each and every one of them has got their own issues for not coming. However, most of the work, what the job of the leaders to do is to set the tone. So they come up for the first couple of days and they set the momentum. But all the real work is done by the civil servants in the background. And it's over the next 2 weeks where you end up getting all of the real hard work done. And some leaders have turned up.
Keir Starmer.
Yeah. Importantly, Keir Starmer turned up. And he sets a very ambitious agenda for the UK. And he is trying to step into the space that's being vacated by America and trying to portray the UK as a leader on the world stage. So someone who can be, I don't know if you're right, there was $1.6 trillion was added to the Chinese economy last year on the energy transition alone. There's a huge economic opportunity there. There's hundreds of billions of dollars being added to the US economy for the same reason. The belief is the UK can be stepping into that and taking a piece of that. So if the likes of Keir Starmer can step up, and Brazil have already stepped up as well. You can build some momentum, and if you build momentum, then we may see some positive progress being made over the next 2 weeks.
So, Gaurav, even though they're not there, there's no Macron, there's no Biden, there's no Xi of China, even though they're not there, they've sent delegations and presumably the work and the commitment is there?
I think it's definitely there. What COP29 in particular is facing this year is a cheap oil problem. That's how I would read it. Oil, and that's becoming the new coal, or gradually is morphing into the new coal, whereby which the demand regears towards petrochemicals and aviation. Human mobility gets increasingly electrified, and this regearing of demand pulls the price right down. Demand falls, price comes down, and suddenly you have a cheaper resource of energy as part of the wide energy mix. So this wasn't as pronounced. Now, this is about short-termism, but a lot of these political folks are often about short-termism when they are in office. They're looking at the next 10, 15, 20 years, 30 years maybe. That's what they ought to be. And this is a unique problem that they're facing. Now, this doesn't necessarily have to do with who's an oil exporter and who's not. If you look at the recent COPs, you look at Egypt, you look at Scotland, you look at the United Arab Emirates, and Azerbaijan now, and Brazil next. All of these markets are oil producers.
Ruth, I'll come to you just on that issue of short-termism. Politicians are in it for the next election cycle. You rarely see people looking past 4, 5-year terms. How big of an issue is that, do you think, for the climate where, long-term leadership is really what's needed here?
Well, I think when you look at the kind of climate impacts that we're seeing, we're actually not looking at a problem that's in the future. We're looking at climate impacts that are happening today. So the devastating floods in Valencia, where maybe 300 people have lost their lives. We've also seen huge hurricanes in the US recently. We've seen 4 simultaneous typhoons in the Philippines. So these impacts really aren't a thing of tomorrow, and leaders need to start preparing to work under conditions of uncertainty, under conditions of disaster response today.
And Ruth, one name who's not there and is casting a very big shadow over COP29 is Donald J. Trump. What can we read into his re-election, and what do you think a Trump second term spells for climate change?
Well, it's definitely casting a long shadow over the conference. Not much that the US commits to at COP29 can be taken as likely to be delivered. And the main goal of this conference is to deliver a new finance goal for the world, for developed countries to deliver money to developing countries to help them fund their climate transition and to respond to climate change. Now, one thing that the US election does deliver is certainty. The US is not going to be in the game of providing climate finance over the next 4 years. It's not going to be pushing hard for strong global climate action. So that means that other countries, as my fellow guest on the panel said, are going to need to step up and fill that void. Now, one of those countries is the UK. China is also going to be looking to take advantage of all of the opportunities of transition that the US seems likely to eschew. The EU also provides strong leadership generally at these COPs. So let's see who fills that void.
Chris, just to you, Trump is on record as saying climate change is a hoax. We have the president of Argentina, Javier Milei, saying it's a socialist lie. How damaging is this when you have these populist leaders coming out with this kind of rhetoric?
Yeah, it is damaging certainly to the people who follow them. The people who follow them, who listen to them, they will be influenced by that. But if you look around the world, it's inescapable. Like, it is real. We are seeing the impacts of climate change everywhere. It's on our borders. It's in Spain. It is a serious global issue. I think as Mother Nature continues to tap us on the shoulder and say and increases her voice, increasingly tells us that this is going to be more and more of a problem, it can't be ignored.
Gaurav, just come in on that. So for the next 4 years, the United States really isn't going to care about climate change. If you've got Trump in power and he thinks it's all a hoax, he's not going to commit to this, is he?
I suspect so. But you see, in some ways, he can't exactly, he's not going to unwind or unpick. He might politically, for the sake of politics, he might just do that. He's not going to unpick everything that has been achieved under the Biden administration. It's just going to be packaged as such, and some measures are going to be, I love oil, I love natural gas, I'm pro-oil, I'm on side of the drillers. I think the issue here is both Ruth and Chris have highlighted the opportunity as well as the challenge. I think one of the reasons why we've gone backwards with this particular COP29 is that the engagement with the finance community is a bit more lukewarm than it was at COP28. Because some of these big finances, the PE guys, the hedge fund managers, the investment bankers, they turned out in their droves in Dubai last year. And I think some of that gold dust has gone to their in-house event, ADIPEC. And what's happened is that when you look at COP29, these guys have not turned up in numbers. Now, you might say it's $1 trillion opportunity, 500 billion, 5 trillion. The number doesn't matter. As Ruth and Chris have said, it is an opportunity. But if you don't get the finance guys in meaningful engagement with the finance guys, it's troubling. And this is what this COP28 has kind of failed to achieve.
Ruth, are we going backwards on climate, do you think?
Well, climate change is certainly not going backwards. That would be a much better state of affairs. But around the world, I think we are seeing some worrying trends. We're seeing a lot of right-wing governments who are less inclined to act on climate change and who push out these narratives around the transition being expensive, it overburdening ordinary people. And those are really worrying because we are going to need the public to be on board with governments in order to respond to climate impacts when they come and to take action for climate mitigation. So in some ways, yes, I think you're right. But then, as Chris says, as those climate impacts and those taps on the shoulder become increasingly more forceful, we do see a correlation between extreme weather and public concern about the environment. So in democratic countries, at least, we would expect to see more impetus from people for politicians to take action.
Ruth, do you think politicians like Trump have done the calculation? They've realised that, in all honesty, their core support, there's no votes in climate change policy pumping money into this, and they've done a very simple political calculation?
It's possible. That would be, assuming a great deal of cynicism from them. I think many people find it difficult to get their head around the magnitude of the risk that we face from climate change. I know as a climate change researcher, I certainly find that hard. And a lot of people have a lot less time and headspace for this challenge. So I think there is an element of simple calculation. What are people interested in right now? But that also provides an opportunity for public mobilization. If governments are able to engage with their citizens on climate action, I think there is a potential groundswell of public action that could help really bring us back down closer to where we need to be in emissions terms.
Gaurav, just come in on the political calculation they've made. Do you think it's that simple that a lot of these populist leaders, they know what their core support are interested in, and climate is not one of those topics?
I suspect so. You see, from a policy perspective, yes, they'll put on a face, play to their own audience, their own core constituency, and that is fine. So policy making might suffer, but they can't knock the private sector for six. Of course, the private sector can't achieve everything, but there is such a thing known as green hushing. That some of the markets, the United States, for instance, where there's a lot of hard work going on, but people are not so loud and proud, yet they're still working on solutions.
Chris, you work in the renewables energy. Give our viewers a taste of where we are in terms of what renewables can deliver. And there's obviously money to be made in this as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, this is obviously the finance COP we're talking about this year, and there's essentially three buckets of finance that we're looking at, and the first and the largest one is exactly this. It is the energy transition. It's the investment part of it. It's where you're putting money in, and the idea is you get some more money out. It's the easiest part to be financing, because the second part is then savings. So you're building resilience for borrowing from the future, and the third part is the kind of the loss and damage. So it's how you deal with the cataclysm. But if we're asking about the first part of it, is just the pure the renewables part. It is the energy of the future. It's actually the energy of the present. It is right now in most parts of the world. It is cost competitive, if not cheaper, than building new coal and new gas plants. The opportunities, as long as you have the right levels of regulation and support, you can like this is an unstoppable transition. But it is stoppable if you don't have regulation. So one of the things the new Labour government has done is they have removed the blockage for building of onshore wind, which was a very good start. But the previous government had a complete ban on things, and this is like in the UK. It is something that is quite. If you compare Scotland with England and the amount of winds there as opposed to wind here, it's you just can't compare the two. Like you have a huge amount of Scotland, you have none here, and that is primarily just because of supportive regulations. If you have the supportive regulations there, the opportunity is massive.
And just tell me, Chris, do you think we'll ever get to the day when the green industry, renewable industry, is as vocal as the fossil fuel industry is?
The problem with the green industry and the renewable industry is that it is fragmented. The fossil fuel industry, it's very tight. It's fundamentally a small number of companies, a small number of nations, and over the generations they've learned to cooperate. We are hundreds of thousands of small little players. It's very, very difficult to be trying to unify. However, say Mother Nature is forcing that conversation in our direction. So hopefully so, but. I do think the fossil fuel industry has got very, very strong structural advantages over the green industry.
Ruth, I saw a phrase the other day Keir Starmer used where he said he wanted to talk about the opportunities of tomorrow. In all honesty, with the way planet Earth is going, tomorrow's getting to be quite late on this topic, isn't it? I mean, we need immediate action.
Yeah, we certainly do. And as Chris says, the UK government has removed some of the blockages to climate action here. And they're also seeking to establish themselves or re-establish themselves as a world leader on climate action. And I think that, as we said, with America stepping away from climate action for now, there are increased opportunities for countries that are willing to push hard on this. If countries are investing in fossil fuels, those are not the fuels of tomorrow. And there is a real risk there that countries are going to be investing in assets that then become stranded. So they're going to be trying to bring on new natural gas, for example, when the demand for that is going to plummet as countries start to transition. So it's a really risky play, whereas staying with the energy system status quo might seem like a safe bet. Trump referred to the US's oil reserves as liquid gold. In fact, as Chris says, the energy of the future is about clean technology, it's about electrification, it's about a safer planet for us all.
Chris, you've studied this for years. Give us a sense of where planet Earth is right now. I mean, the climate emergency is a phrase we hear. We've seen the floods in Valencia the other week, absolutely terrible, and a terrible loss of life as well. There can be no denying this, and yet people still do.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not in a good place, to be frank, Enda. Like we're at the moment, if we don't make any... Okay. So we had last year, at last year's COP, there was a stock take where the world looked back and they said, are we on track for staying well below 2 degrees and trying to stay within kind of 1.5 degrees if all possible? The result was, no, we are miles away. We are miles away. So that's why these 3 COPs are essential. Last year set us on the path of transitioning away from fossil fuels and tripling renewables. Good start. Next year's COP is about new nationally determined contributions, where each nation goes and says, well, these are new promises where we're going to do this and we're going to stay within our 2 degrees barriers. This year is the transition between the two. This is about financing. This is about how we pay for it. So it's absolutely crucial. Unless we can get this COP together, unless we can agree how funds are going to come from, go across borders, go from where the funds are to where the funds are needed, next year's COP is going to be a washout. And if next year's COP is going to be washout, we're looking at 3 degrees warming. And we see today we're at 1.3, potentially 1.5 degrees. If we end up doubling that, it's all bets are off. We're like the climate catastrophe is, we don't know we're living right now if we get to that type of point.
Gaurav, talk to me about the money then. What kind of appetite is there from the big players to hand over their cash to help countries that a lot of their electorate probably couldn't find on a map? I mean, some Pacific Island nations that are in desperate need of help.
Absolutely, and some very angry sound bites have come out of these folks who are complaining that the world is not taking action. It's all a talking shop. There's a lot of lecturing going on. And I think it has been rightly pointed out, we head to Brazil next, but Petrobras's production is up by 13%. Everybody acknowledges 2024 is going to be one of the hottest years on record, or whatever metric you might use. So balancing the politics and the money is really, really tough, but it has to be done. Now, the question is, targets have been set. People have ticked some of those boxes. Oil prices are at their lowest since 2021. So even with that, within the OECD at least, you still see renewables investment going up. Now, that needs to, be spread across the planet. We're not quite there. There's always hope.
Ruth, just on a positive note, can you see people agreeing a financial deal then to sort things out and to agree to work more closely together, or to come to a deal that will make a difference?
Well, a deal has to be agreed at this COP. Whether that deal is enough, as Chris says, to set that kind of middle domino of the finance to enable those new climate plans to be 1.5 compliant, to be implemented by developing countries. That's really the big question. But as Chris said, also, those who are doing the negotiation are there, even if the world leaders are not. And they understand, I think, the importance of getting that finance goal in place. There was a previous finance goal that was repeatedly not met. It massively damaged trust. It set back climate action. So it's very clear that this is vital. And we'll just be hoping that negotiators manage to get where they need to be by the end of this frantic 2 weeks in Baku, trying to find some global solutions to a global problem.
Chris, on that point, the Paris Agreement was much heralded. Where does it stand now? Is it in danger of falling apart?
No, I think the world is still committed to this. As long as COPs continue, we will still be trying to move towards the Paris goals. We've just had another piece of the Paris puzzle filled in, which is about kind of carbon market compliance. Was the last piece of Paris was announced on the first day of COP. It's a step forward. This allows for some kind of cross borders movements of capital. If say a project is built in developing markets, it can be earning carbon credits, and the carbon credits can come from the developed world to help pay for that. That was the last piece of Paris. Unless a complete disaster happens where President Trump, he is going to leave. If he also leaves the UN framework, that could also have another kind of damaging impacts. But as long as the rest of the world steps up, and it looks like, for example, like China is stepping up, looks like Brazil is stepping up with its own national development contributions, with the UK is stepping up. As long as the rest of the world kind of understands its importance and supports it, it'll be okay. And pressure will continue to mount for these targets to be hit over time. So I can't personally, and I hope and pray that it doesn't, as flawed as the process of COP is, we need it.
And Gaurav, the next COP will be in Brazil. Tell me your thoughts on going there and what they will want.
I think they'd want more meaningful participation by the Indians and the Chinese. I think in some ways I'm a bit more pessimistic on China than Chris is. I think that the Chinese are talking the talk, but are they really walking the walk? That's the question here. And ditto applies to India. I mean, I had a conversation with the Indian oil minister in September in Houston, and he seemed to think that, look, we're doing as part of a wider energy mix, but our citizens' needs come first. And the same problem applies to China. Now, these two countries have to engage more meaningfully in Brazil than they have done at COP29, and that for me is the bigger problem. Now, as far as the Americans go, yes, I think he will pull out, that's for sure, of the Paris Agreement. But I think they will continue to green hush and still work towards a greener Alamo, perhaps behind the scene.
Just tell me, India, where is India with regard to renewables?
I think what they think is they've adopted this line that they think natural gas would be the bridging fuel. They are trying to build what Hardeep Singh Puri, their petroleum and natural gas minister, describes as a gas economy. So they're working towards that. Yet at the same time, I'd say they've made some decent investments towards solar and wind.
Ruth, just in summary, how important has this COP been for the planet?
This COP is really vital for the planet. We need that finance in place. We need that global cooperation on the Paris Agreement to continue. And we need action, because while those temperature thresholds of 1.5 and 2 degrees might sound small, breaching them its consequences are drastic, not just for those small Pacific islands, which will find sea level rise may actually even annihilate them from the map, but also for all countries, because as we pass those temperature thresholds, we may hit climate tipping points, which are irreversible and which lead to runaway climate change in ways that we can't really predict and will find very difficult to manage. So it really is a crucial COP.
Chris, final point to you. I mean, do you worry that at some day in the future, maybe not next year, but in a decade from now, Kiribati or Vanuatu, some of these places, they will become a memory? These are countries that just may not exist.
Absolutely, yeah. In particular, if we end up hitting some of these climate tipping points, there's rumblings that we could be moving from having the Amazon rainforest as being a carbon sink, a positive for us, to being a dry savanna. where it's just it's annihilated. And with that, the amount of carbon that then puts into the air, it's a vicious circle, vicious cycle. Yeah, you melt it, it then leads to more melting of polar ice caps. And again, it's unless we take very dramatic action. Essentially, we need to be moving down carbon production by similar levels to what we did during the pandemic, during the COVID pandemic, each and every year, by similar types of percentages each and every year between now and 2030, to be holding on to keep 1.5 alive. It's enormously challenging. We need to grab that challenge, because otherwise, you're exactly right. These island nations will disappear, and it's not just those island nations. It will impact on every human on this planet's lives.
Chris Caldwell, thank you. Gaurav and Ruth in Manchester as well. Thank you all so much. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World, and if you like what you see there, please do hit that subscribe button. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all of the team here, goodbye, and thank you for watching.